Hi, this is Dan Zeilinger from Trad Jazz Today. Today I'm going to be interviewing a staple from the New Orleans jazz scene, Mr. Matt Perrine.
Yeah. So tell me what it is that I'm a part of here. What are you putting together?
Well, believe it or not, you are my very first interview on a new YouTube channel we're putting up, where I'm just contacting people I've met in the past during my career and just kind of catching up. Um, the idea is kind of to offer a kind of insider's view look at the business and the style we play. I'm not I'm not being a trad Nazi about who I'm going to have on or not have on, or what style. I'm not going to be picky about what style they play. I miss musicians lounges
Yeah.
at the jazz festivals, and kind of want to get that kind of vibe.
Musicians lounge.
You know what I'm saying?
Judo. I know exactly. Yeah. And then
So,
also, very often, it can also be sometimes, especially in Europe, if there's a big festival, the place where the musicians eat is like the same location for all the bands.
there you go.
So you're sitting there eating and across.
Yeah,
the
I've been to Edinburgh several times, and the festivals in Wales and things. But yeah, hey man, I was reading your creds. You've come a long way since I knew you in Sacramento, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a wild ride, and
I was trying to remember where we exactly first met.
yeah, I suppose if I could see you, that would be easier. But am I to understand that you did a lot of those traditional jazz festivals in California?
I did a lot of, well, so I was at Sacramento almost every year for about 15 years with either Misbehavin' or Banjo Mania,
Okay.
or, were you playing with Wooden Nickel?
No, I played with Stan Mark's band.
Okay.
They all, after I quit the band because I was moving to New Orleans, and after I quit the band, the rest of that band all quit at the same time. They hired Eric Klepp on bass, tuba, and they did their own band.
Yeah, well, I know Stan Mark, so I can understand that.
Hey, Stan was very good to me.
Good.
He was always quick to share things that he knew, and at that point in my career, I was anxious to learn things. So the fact that he had traveled around the country with a top big band and was that's Maynard Ferguson's band.
Oh yeah.
He was Maynard's right-hand guy. He handled the merch on the road for Maynard Ferguson. Yeah. And just the way that he changed the Sacramento music scene right away when he showed up. I was just very curious his methods, and he was.
Yeah, I actually started out in my youth as a trumpet guy. And so I knew Stan from Maynard's band, but
Right.
Not that I was ever in Maynard's band, mind you. I'm not claiming that, but I was a real fanboy of the band.
I understand. The first concert I ever went to that really meant something to me that wasn't traditional jazz related was to go see Maynard Ferguson when I was in the 7th grade. I went and saw him. And we all went, and we all bought the T-shirt, and Friday was Maynard Ferguson T-shirt day. Friday, we go to school with our Maynard T-shirts.
My poor wife married a high note trumpet player, and she ended up with an old tuba player. So her bad. So let's sort of go through that questionnaire, sort of that I sent you.
That's fine.
Now, if I remember right, you were born in Sacramento, right?
Yes. Well, my family moved to Sacramento when I was 1 or so.
Oh, okay. So, because you were born?
No, my dad worked, and it was. I think it was a promotion for him to be able to move to Sacramento. So that's what he did.
Oh well, cool. And so I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to place you. Maybe we met underneath a piano with Bonnie Otto or something. I don't know, but very I know.
I spent time under a piano with Bonnie Otto for sure.
Bonnie's actually agreed to come on the channel when she's feeling better. And I don't know. Did you get my little thing? I told you that I just talked to Lee Floyd.
I did. Yeah.
how serendipitous. I didn't realize you. Yeah, I didn't realize you had been working together so much.
Yeah. We when Lee moved to town, it's something that I had actually thought before Lee had moved to town, that there are all sorts of great banjo players in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Swinging 4-beat banjo players, really traditional 2-beat banjo players, guys who have studied Danny Barker their whole careers, and so that's what they do. Just lots and lots of and there's lots of work for banjo players in New Orleans, so we attract banjo players.
Yeah.
But typically, one thing that wasn't in New Orleans until Lee showed up is real like gunslinger. You know what I
Right.
mean? The guy who shows up with all that, he can swing like everybody else, but then he also has this other, like, show business, super facility, all that stuff that when you think of like the caricature of the band player, there's that guy who plays, those old tunes, and it's super loud, and there's lots of notes, and it's incredibly complicated, and he looks enjoyable while he does it.
Oh yeah, he's.
It's something that I felt was conspicuously missing until Lee Floyd showed up.
Yeah, he's a great showbiz guy, along with being a real warrior in the trenches.
Absolutely, no question.
Yeah. So let me these questions here. For example, when did you realize that music was going to be a thing in your life? How young were you?
I was in junior high school. I was probably in the 7th grade when I realized that this was the thing that it seemed to come the easiest to me in ways that others didn't seem to understand how easy it was.
Yeah.
I just had a sense for it, a knack for it,
Did you start on tuba?
No, I started on trombone.
Okay.
But I started playing the tuba in the 6th grade. There was a Dixieland jazz band that was starting. Kurt Pearsall, local trumpet. He had a trumpet student who was showing lots of promise, and that student, David Etterbeek, had a younger brother, John Etterbeek, who played the trombone. And so I don't know if Kurt was also teaching John, but he saw in those two young musicians the beginning, the origin of a youth Dixieland band. And at that time, the jazz minors had their thing. They started, I believe, I don't think they were as young as we were. When we started, we were in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grades. But they had been on the scene, and Kurt had been, I think, somewhat influenced by that. And a few of the high schools around Sacramento, their pep band that they would send to basketball games and such were small Dixieland bands. And he was teaching at El Camino. They had one. Rio Americano had one. So there were some young musicians who were playing the music. Also important to there was a very active traditional jazz society in Sacramento.
Oh yeah.
And their raison d'etre is to pass the torch. That's what they're all about. And so they were really interested in involving the community as much as possible in traditional jazz, and also finding young musicians to give scholarships to.
Okay.
All of my private lessons through junior high school and high school were always from the Traditional Jazz Society.
Cool. I see that you're teaching at the Sacramento Jazz Camp on occasion.
I did teach at the Sacramento Jazz Camp, yes, for a while. Now I'm teaching at the New Orleans Jazz Camp.
Right. Had you been up at Mammoth yet? Mammoth Lakes Jazz Camp in the early days?
Unfortunately, not. I left Sacramento in '92.
Right.
And when I was in Sacramento, I didn't ever get a chance to do. I played Mammoth after I moved to New Orleans. I came back and I played Mammoth. For a while, I was working with the Black Dogs.
Okay. Replacing Gannett for a while?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
That's some big shoes to step into.
Yeah, talk about an impossible task. Luckily, it
Absolutely.
was not to replace David Gannett. No, that would have been impossible.
Yeah. Besides that, your sousaphone doesn't catch on fire, so you know.
It wasn't the sousaphone that caught on fire. It was the things in front of the sousaphone.
Right, right. No, I remember, and in fact, I'm still in contact with Dave.
Yeah.
But coolness. Yeah. I'm sorry, I just lost my caboose on my train of thought here for a second. But so that's now I remember. So you moved from Sacramento to New Orleans. That must have been a bit of a culture shock.
Oh, brother, you ain't lying. You ain't lying. I'd never been anywhere in the South when I moved to New Orleans, and I I had decided that I wanted to be in Sacramento. Um, no disrespect to Sacramento or the musicians in it. Uh, Looking for a slightly larger pond, and I just, it's where I was born, so I wanted to try something different.
Sure.
I was looking at different cities, and then Steve Yoakum uh, wrote
Right.
to me, called me, and offered me a job, basically. So that's what drew me to New Orleans, was I had gainful employment waiting for me there.
Boy, the Black Dogs were something.
Yes, at this point, well, Steve Yoakum left the Black Dogs um, before I had started working with him. So there was Steve Yoakum's band, and then there was the Black Dogs. The
Right.
Black Dogs at Galata, and they continued without Steve Yoakum.
Right.
They were doing their thing, and they're based in Orlando, and Steve and I were in New Orleans playing regularly, and we played a couple of festivals out there, but not that many.
Yeah. When the Dogs were at their height, they were probably the closest thing that our style of music had to rock superstars. I mean, man, seeing the Black Dogs at a festival was just a life-changing thing for me.
It's true. They brought a gun to a knife fight.
Very good, yeah. And to think they originated from Orlando, didn't they? From the Disney World parks.
Yes, they were based out of Orlando, and the traditional jazz festival circuit was based on and existed on the backs of professional people, doctors, lawyers, and engineers, and other things, who played music as a hobby.
Oh yeah.
It was based on these amateur bands who would come in, and they were just looking for a chance for them and their wives to go for a weekend to someplace else. Generally, you were driving; people weren't flying. You drew from bands from around your general area first, and and that's who you had, and that's what it was based on. It was not really meant for professional musicians to go and try and sell a ton of merch.
Right.
It was based on something entirely different.
I got to tell you, the idea for this show, for these interviews, came from a Zoom interview I was doing for my son, and because he's the director of a drum and bugle corps right now, and that I had written for a long time. And I was talking to the guy who was doing the interview, one of the DCI folks, and I had mentioned that I was a professional tuba player. And he stopped in his tracks. He said, "Professional tuba player? I didn't even know that was a thing, a Dixieland tuba player." And in fact, so much so that he had me return for a one-on-one about being a professional Dixieland tuba player. And one of the first people I thought of was you. So that's how my son came up with the idea for this channel, and for me to start talking to people from my past and guys who do this for a living. As an educational tool for a lot of kids who want to get into the style still, and for a lot of us who just want to reminisce about our past,
Well, I'll tell you this. I grew up in the suburbs, lived in the same house the whole time that I grew up, relatively small house in the suburbs in Sacramento. And when I decided that I was going to be a professional musician in the 7th grade, I had never actually met a full-time professional musician. And every person I ever even suggested that maybe music might be what I wanted to do, they all told me the same thing. They all said, you should have something else that you do.
Fall back on.
Not talented, but in terms of a life, it's just not a very smart choice to make. You know, have a job and play music is what all of them told me.
Sure.
And so with the decision that I was going to probably be a professional musician was basically a sense of, okay, well, my family, because I knew I wanted to get married and have kids, I said, my family will probably be poor. And we will probably rent an apartment that we live in, which is kind of crazy because I actually had never been in somebody's apartment at that point in my life. I'd seen them on television and television shows like Good Times and stuff.
Sure.
A view of what an apartment looked like and where people who didn't have much money tended to live, you know? And so that's probably where I got the idea that, okay, well, you know, we're going to love each other and we're going to be happy, but we're probably not going to have money, was just the decision I made myself in my make-believe family when I chose to be a professional musician.
Yeah, it's true. I took the other path and I actually married a nurse.
Yeah,
So,
smart.
well, it wasn't on purpose, but you know, that wasn't the reason. But she loved me enough to understand my passions and what I had to do to be who I am.
Right. That's
And it's a great thing, you know.
Well, I should also mention that we're sitting in my home right now.
Sure.
It's own a house. Like, it's worked out better for me than I had thought.
I agree. Me too. So coolness. What was the very first paying gig you ever had?
Well, I mentioned before that peer assault. Basically, he had these two young students, and he wants to put together a traditional jazz band, a Dixie jazz band. And so he sent a notice around at the local. There was an honor band for the district we were in, the elementary school honor band.
Well, by the way, my sister used to live in Carmichael, so I'm hip to the area.
Okay, good. Well, I was playing, you know, fourth trombone in the honor band, and a notice came around saying that there was this Dixieland band that was starting, and they had some positions that were open, and one of them was tuba. I'd never really played the tuba, but one of my best friends, his dad, who was a physics teacher at Sac State. In fact, I think he might have been head of the department. Anyway, his hobby was music, and he had lots and lots of musical instruments around the house. And when I went over there, we would play music together. And so I played his tuba a couple of times and thought it was kind of a gas. I just thought it was kind of fun. I saw I had this opportunity to maybe audition for this band. The audition date was in a week. I went to my friend's house and I borrowed his dad's tuba and just played it for a week and got to where I could play a major scale and I could play When the Saints Go Marching In. I could play that song, the melody and such.
Sure.
And then I went to the audition. I was the only guy who showed up. That's a good sign. But we started playing and everything sounded wrong. And no one could figure out why. Well, the reason why was because my friend's tuba was an E-flat tuba.
The very first time I played the Chilliwack Jazz Festival up in British Columbia, I asked them if they could supply me with a horn because I wasn't flying my horn at the time. And I got on stage, and right before the downbeat, they handed me an E-flat Besson, and I had no idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I understand.
Game up quite a bit. Anyway, Kurt found me a B-flat horn and put me in the band, and that band stayed together. We played most of the California festivals, and we went up to play in Canada. Did like these tours of the Northeast. I started writing for that band. Like we started when I was in the 6th grade. In the 7th grade, I started writing arrangements for that band, and that was the band where I got my chops together in terms of writing for 3 horns or 4 horns.
Yeah, I was checking out your resume. You've done some pretty heavy duty stuff, and not the least of which was writing the theme for the Comedy Relief special.
Yeah, that's a song that was in. I had written that song I was in a band called Bonorama. Yeah,
right.
Still in a band, and I do a lot of writing for that band. And I had actually written that song for that band with the thought that the band could really use a good opener, like something that had a solid beginning of a set kind of energy to it, you know? So yeah, it didn't. And so when they were looking for material for that, we were the backup band for that show. We
Okay.
played we bumped all the comedians in and out, and we played the opening theme, and there were a couple of musical bits that we were the background band for. So, you know, they were looking at our material, looking for something to be the opening tune. So I wasn't that surprised when they chose it, because that's actually what it was written for.
Wow, that's neat. Hey, listen, I'm looking through your resume here, and let me shoot a couple of names past you and have you talk about it a little bit. How about Eric Clapton?
Yeah, that was a funny session. There was a local producer, he's actually from Lafayette, but he would call me maybe, you know, every other month or so. And when he called me, it would always be some band that I'd never heard of. I'd always get brought into one or two songs just because they want to put a little bit of New Orleans wiggle on part of their record, and adding tuba to it can do that sometimes. It always pays really well. I always go back and research these bands and feel very silly for not knowing who they were, you know, because they're huge. They're all these really amazing, huge acts. It's actually kind of fun to come in and not know who they are at all.
Oh yeah, and actually, you find out that they kind of respect you better when you're not fanboying during the session.
That's also probably true. Yeah, that's probably true. And so anyway, this was a session like that, and I showed up, and the guy who was sitting at the control booth was the same guy who had played guitar and the same guy who had sung. So I thought that he was self-producing a record, and it was a Fats Waller song, which I hadn't known. So I listened to it a couple of times in the booth and kind of figured out what I wanted to do. And I was, once again, adding tuba to a bass track that's already there.
Okay.
So I go in, I do the tune, and this guy sounds really good. Great guitar player, great singer, sounded great. And I was just hired to do one song. So I did the one song, and they're happy. I'm taking my horn apart, and he comes in, he goes, actually, we have a second song that we think you'd be right for. Can you stick around? I'm like, oh yeah, you know, great, double my salary, you know. And so he goes, okay, why don't you come and take a listen to it? I said, okay, well, by the way, you sound really great on this track. The guitar playing and the singing, the song really suits you. You sound great on it. He goes, oh, great, but you know, this isn't my record. I said, oh, whose record is it? He goes, Eric Clapton.
Oh, interesting.
So I'd already actually done one of the tracks before I even knew that it was an Eric Clapton record.
Wow.
They finished the record, and then they bring it to him, and then he puts on his guitar and his vocal. So those great guitar and vocal tracks that I was playing to were just placeholders for when they had something more cohesive for Mr. Clapton to play along with. But I never met him. He wasn't there. I've never heard from him. They misspelled my name on the
Well, that's something I really understand. If you see my name,
yeah.
in fact, I've got a collection of clippings from jazz festivals with misspelled names, so it's fun.
Yeah, I think that was something like Pat Marino or something. I mean, it was a little mix-up, you know. And my wife was furious. She jumped on the phone and complained a bunch. I'm like, what are they going to do now? Like the records, they just printed 2 million copies of this CD.
Now, did you meet your wife before or after you moved?
After.
Okay, I see she's the singer.
She is, yes. I was playing at the jazz festival, and Debbie was there with a friend, just to come for the jazz festival. Like they kind of took a different trip and made a quick diversion down to New Orleans just to see the festival or continuing on the road trip. So that's how we met, and then we wrote to each other for a few weeks, and then we finally got on the phone. Then she came to visit. Basically, we met in April. She came to visit in the fall. She came to live in the winter, and we got married the next fall. Like it just all happened incredibly quickly.
That's great. That's good. Nifty. Okay, so back to you now here for a second. I see that you're really involved with education. You're what, part of the adjunct facility for university? Is that true?
Yes, I'm on faculty at the University of New Orleans. I teach a traditional jazz combo at the University of New Orleans. They feel like any jazz musician who comes to New Orleans to study, their education isn't complete without learning some of the traditional jazz of the city.
I'm so happy to hear that. That's very rare in any form of schooling in the country.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this, as a young bass player and tuba player, I'm really glad that I learned traditional jazz first and that I learned it by reading it out of a book of bass parts. Because most of those parts, they'll have notes for you to read. They're usually 2-beat, and they'll have chords above. And you can I found after reading those notes and getting the notes under my fingers, which was relatively easy in traditional jazz, easy to hear, easy to understand, easy to play, right? I started looking at the chords. And in that, I had some, oh, it's going to that 5 chord. Oh, it's going to that 1 chord.
Right. You start seeing the patterns.
You know, it was impossible to miss the patterns that way for me. And it gave me a really good basis when I did actually when I stopped just playing scales and started actually studying music theory. That helped me a lot.
You know, that's among the older Dixieland players, or I like to call classic jazz players. In fact, I had a favorite. Do you remember the Hot Frogs?
I do very well.
I was their last tuba player before they killed themselves. And
I had a copy of that record with the frying pan and the frogs jumping out of it.
Right. The Jumpin' Jazz Band.
Man, I wore that record out. I learned Snake Rag from that record.
Cool tune. But Joe Ashworth used to say, I only read music enough not to screw up my jazz playing.
Yeah. It definitely does feel like there are 2 sides of the brain, and that you need to just concentrate on one or the other if you're going to get anywhere. Like when you start trying to cross-pollinate the brain, when it comes to music, it can get a little tricky and sticky.
So now you said you're now currently with the New Orleans Jazz Camp, youth camp.
It's a adult camp.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And who's the faculty for that? Just out of curiosity.
David Boatinghouse, Gerald French, David Seger comes from Washington, D.C. Dan Levinson comes from New York. Katie Cavera comes from California.
I work with Katie all the time.
I mean, it's Ray Moore. Connie Jones did it for years and years. Now I think it's Pulsar. You know who?
Ed Pulsar, sure.
No, not Ed. His son.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah. His name.
I don't know.
Anyway, yeah, it's Charlie Halloran on trombone. I mean, it's
wow.
All, it would be a great band if it actually ever came to that. You know, that's where the professors came from.
Right.
I know they're all teaching at the camp, and they were like, "Hey, this is a good band. We should go play gigs." You know, Rusty Stires and such. Yeah.
I was actually the first bass teacher at Mammoth at the very beginning, and I worked for I think 11 years with Rusty Stires and Brad Roth at Knott's Berry Farm, and so that crew, and then I worked with Dendel in San Diego a lot. That whole group are very close friends of mine. I've spent some serious time with, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you are.
Oh, well, specifically, can we just pause for a second and talk about Rusty Stires?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm trying to get him on the channel, actually.
Oh, I'm sure he'll do it. Yeah, I'm sure he'll do it. When I was in the 5th grade, Sacramento, I believe it was 79. The festival had really just begun. It really wasn't what it became at all yet. And my parents had been going to the Jazz Society, and they were interested in going to the festival, but they couldn't afford to just spend money on something they knew next to nothing about. So instead, we just went down to Old Sac, which is where it all was in Old Sac.
Yep.
And we just kind of walked around. We looked through the cracks at some different things, and there were a couple of stages where they were free. They had some of those high school Dixieland bands I talked about. They'd play those festivals, or they'd also have like high school jazz bands or other kind of mixed, not so traditional necessarily, but keep it free for the public, And I had a couple of very informative moments, which I still remember. One of which was we walked by Firehouse Lot.
Yep, and that's exactly what I was thinking.
It was packed. And I looked through the cracks, and it was the new Black Eagle Jazz Band. And Eli Newberger was the tuba player. And at that time, I was a trombone player. I hadn't started playing the tuba yet. But they were a great sounding band, and the audience was really into it, and I was really enjoying it. And then it's a huge space. It probably seats 5 people, which for a festival like this is really big. Eli came forward to the front of the stage with the banjo player without microphones, and they played When You Wish Upon a Star. And you could hear it because everybody was silent. And I'd never seen a musician so connected with his instrument. When he played, there's this beautiful fluidity that moves through his body. Almost a sensual experience.
Oh yeah. Eli basically makes love to his horn. Absolutely.
And I'd never seen anything like that before, or heard anything like that before. And that is probably a lot of why I decided to start playing the tuba and to play traditional jazz on the tuba. So there's that. There's my origin story, is watching Eli Newberger play When You Wish Upon a Star in Firehouse Lot at the Sacramento Jazz Jubilee. There
you go. Now you were mentioning Rusty. How did he fit into all this?
Okay, so then the next day we went to a free show and the Jazz Miners were there. And I saw Rusty play with the Jazz Miners in 1979. I don't know how old he was then. He was probably a teenager still at that point.
Oh yeah.
And that band blew my mind. To see musicians who are in their teens playing that level and entertaining on that level, I'd never seen anything like that in my life. And I went and I bought their record, had them all sign it. I took it home and I learned every trombone track off that record. Everyone. That record is where I learned, Since Best Gal Turned Me Down, and Bye Bye Blues, and Sidewalk Strut, and Your Feet's Too Big, and just that. I know that record front to back, all the trombone parts, and that was Brad Roth, and that was Rusty. So then, when the Jazz and Juniors began, and we were trying to get our feet under us, Kurt Kursall receives a message from Rusty Sires, who says, I see that you guys are coming to the San Diego Jazz Festival. I'd like to have the students come to my house and have a kind of master class with them. So we found time to go over, and it wasn't his house, it was his apartment. In fact, that's the first apartment I was ever in, come to think of it. And we sat there in his apartment, and he had written out like a whole diagram of things that early jazz musicians need to think about, and musical examples of all of these things, and just walked us through it. And it was everything from Earth, Wind, and Fire in terms of how to play music and playing music together and such. It was pretty expansive, but it also included quite a bit of Louis Armstrong and other early jazz. Anyway, I was just incredibly touched that he would have such interest in talking to a group of young people who, we played traditional jazz. Like understand why that would be so interesting to him. I was just, I felt very special that somebody like him would find time to do something like this.
Yeah, he's a great guy that way. He was teaching a class at Fullerton Junior College in Southern California for a while, and he had asked me to come on. Now, I'm not a piano player, but he had asked me to come out and play piano for his class, and so I've actually got to see him teach. He's a great teacher. He's a great musician, and he and I have spent, again, serious time together. So that's wonderful to hear that he's influenced a lot of players. You know, he was one of the early influences on Bria Schoenberg.
Right. I'm not surprised at all. Yeah. And then we got to actually finally spend time together at the traditional jazz camp in Sacramento when I was teaching there. I taught there under Kurt Parasol, and then I came back and taught there under Bill Denver. So I got to spend some time with him in that environment. And also, that's the only place we ever got to play together was at camp. We've never actually played a gig together.
I know, that's good. That's crazy. That's great.
Well, horrible, actually, because he's one of my favorite musicians, and I know he feels well about me. It's one of the sad realities of my career that I haven't had the chance to really get into the trenches with Rusty Stiers yet. That would complete the circle for me. Oh,
that's cool. No, my son, of course, has been in contact with you about setting up these calls. He's a trumpet player, and he was actually an alumni of the Mammoth Lakes Jazz Camp, and Rusty was his teacher up there. So we have a family connection there.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He really is. He's been very successful in his life through hard work and being a really great person and a really great business person. I just, it's hard to see anything wrong with Rusty Stiers.
It's true. It's true. However, if you want to have some dirt, we'll go have a beer sometime. No, I'm kidding.
No, thanks.
Well, Matt, this is great. Now, one of the last questions I want to ask you is, who are the up-and-coming players you see? Who are the people who are coming up through the ranks?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, Tuba Skinny, I guess the secret's out on them.
Oh, yeah.
The first time I heard Tuba Skinny, there was a street band in New Orleans. I'm riding my bike to the French Quarter, and I hear them playing Egyptian Ella.
Pretty obscure, yeah.
Those guys are serious. It's really difficult to do repertoire and make it sound right. I think that part of how they're able to do that is that they live in New Orleans. They've all committed their lives to being here, and that living in New Orleans does help you play traditional jazz better, I think, especially if what you want to do is a New Orleans style traditional jazz.
Sure.
It's a living culture, which is to say that it's constantly changing and constantly moving. We have I find that overall, not everybody feels this way, but overall most New Orleans musicians, traditional jazz musicians, hold a pretty broad view of what it is. There are a few people who say, no, it's only specific, and I respect that point of view, but most of us are more, we don't want to close our eyes and pretend like it's 1930.
Well, the truth of the matter is, especially with those of us who have made our living at it, is we're going to play whatever pays us. We don't have time to be historians and be stuck in the mud. And besides that, jazz is a living thing.
Right. Well, for me, it's really more about, I feel like the audience members should be given everyone going in the same direction at the same time. So if music's going in a certain direction, I'm going to try and get in the middle of that and swim along,
Sure.
It's like my friend Eric Traub used to say, hey, who's playing the right changes? Him. His meaning is, you got to listen to everybody else and you got to do what they do, because that's what the music is right now. It may not be what the music was then. And I'm actually quite conservative and traditional in terms of how I like for these songs to get played, in that I really feel like most traditional jazz musicians don't spend enough time learning the original melodies.
Oh, absolutely.
The original harmonies and the original lyrics, because the fact of the matter is, if you put those three elements together, I think you'll find that these songs were very strategically written, and that the reason why we're still playing this music all these years later is because these songs are indestructible.
Right. That's why they're standards.
In the message, in the melody, in the harmony, it all locks together like a brick box. You just can't mess with it, you know?
Now, on the other hand, you being somebody who's traveled internationally, like I have, you find out that there are really, especially with chord changes, there's real regional quirks.
Of course.
You know, the West Coast guys tend to have learned things out of the Lou Waters book, for example. And it just depends on what part of the country or what part of the world you're playing in. I remember my first time in Europe, they were calling some keys and some chord changes that I thought were bizarre, but it was just part of that area, you know, just part of the locale.
Yeah. I mean, I try to, you know, what I'm interested in only has so much worth in this world. And when I'm on the bandstand, I'm a percentage, you know, and so I need to really go with the majority. I try to go with the majority when I perceive it, you know. Off the bandstand, you want to talk to somebody and maybe try to adjust this or that. Maybe there's a time, place for that. Maybe there isn't. You know, maybe the whole point is what you do on the stage, and you talk about other things when you get off the stage. You know?
Sure.
So, I think that's part of being a musician, is just learning how to operate in different systems. And I have spent a lot of time learning original harmonies and melodies, and I try not to be the guy who's always saying so.
Right. The band that I currently play with, actually up until, same like with you, up until just recently, my weekly gig is a guy who researches the original lead sheets and sheet musics and things. And I have to be honest with you, I didn't learn a lot of those tunes correctly. I learned the casual changes because I got thrown into that world originally.
Right. Well, also, I have to say, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, but a lot of the musicians I heard a lot of these songs, I learned them at traditional jazz festivals. And as I mentioned before, these festivals were not intended for professional musicians.
Right.
They're for amateur musicians to go and entertain their community. You know, that I think that's really important. And I loved it. And I learned a lot there, but I learned some amateurish changes.
You and me both, brother.
Yeah. And I'm not mad at anybody. I'm just saying that, you know, some better stuff was written that luckily is still available to us, you know, if we want to do a little bit of work.
You know, one of the things I too teach, by the way, and one of the things I tell my students about working as a musician is the amount of bosses you work for, because we never work just for ourselves, and we never work for just the guy who's leading the band or the guy who's running the venue. The bottom line is we're working for the audience, because they're the ones who take the money out of their pockets and put it in our pockets. And for a lot of musicians, that's a hard realization.
Yeah, that's an important part of the process, turns out. That money transference part, that's an important part of the process.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I guess the thing which I wasn't prepared for as a young musician was, one of the things people said was, if you're going to be a professional musician, you have to be smart. But nobody told me what that meant, you know. And one thing that you have to learn that no one tells you, which I'm about to, is that when a guy is hiring a musician, a guy's going to hire a trumpet player. From the outside in, it would seem like what he would do is hire the best guy. But that's not really the only criteria. In fact, when a guy is hiring a trumpet player, what he's thinking about is, who is the best guy, who is most often available, who gets along with everybody on the bandstand, who always shows up on time, who looks appropriate, who communicates well with the client and or the fans who show up, right?
Yeah.
Who isn't working right now and might need the money, who is a lot of fun to hang out with on the stand and off the stand, who brings a body of knowledge about the music, who may not be the best player but knows the style the most, who has the most business acumen to actually take this gig and make it into something better next time. You know, how well you play is one in a long line of things that go into the decision on who gets hired.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. It's absolutely true, and it's just so important.
Yeah. I wish somebody had explained it to me that way. I think that would have been useful information. I could have saved it, I think.
You know, Doug Maddox. Yeah.
Yes, I do know Doug Maddox.
Doug used to say, Dan, show business. Which one's the bigger word?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and in a very simplified sense, there aren't truer words to be spoken. The other thing I wanted to just say to you and bounce off you is, if I put together the bands that were, I can't put together the bands of the people I enjoy the most on every instrument, because quite often they just don't get along.
Yeah. Yeah, you do have to consider that sometimes. That can be bad. And I know some band leaders who put bands together, the most important thing is who's going to get along with each other. That's the first thing in importance for him.
It's not a bad criteria.
No. It's who's going to vibe together.
Well, listen, Matt, this has been fun. I think at least I've run out of steam here a little bit, and because I'm 4 or 5. By the way, thank you for being ready so early. That I appreciate that.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I just, for some reason, I thought it was Central Time, so that was my mistake.
It's okay. I'm actually coming to you from Anaheim.
Oh, okay. All right, great.
So good luck. And I know when we first originally communicated, you said you had a lot of friends who would be interested in possibly coming on. And right now I'm going through my list of people that I know. But I may come back at you for some more references.
Sure, of course. Be happy to.
Great. Okay, well, I'm going to sign off. Do you have any last thoughts?
All right. I'll be coming to California in November with the Last Waltz reunion tour. If that happens, I'll be coming to California then. So.
Now, who knows now?
Yeah.
You know?
Hopefully it's going to happen.
If so, ring me up.
All right.
All right. You take care now. Bye-bye.
Later.
Thank you all for watching Trad Jazz Today with Dan Zeilinger. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Videos come out every Wednesday and Friday.